jetzt eine Stimme ab, dann tritt für mich ein, so wie ich für dich eingetreten bin.
Nazi or autistic? Did he mean it? Everyone seems to have come up with a conclusion about this by now, but I just want to pontificate on the matter for a little. So we're going to steelman both cases, both the autism case and the Nazi case, and we're going to see which one's right. So let's start with the case that he's simply autistic. Musk has been open about having Asperger's. He said so on SNL, and he's also at least said that he's not far right. This meme sort of demonstrates the kinds of people who would call Hitler a leftist or a socialist or something. And as you can see, I would say that this center right to the hard right do think that Hitler was a socialist, was a leftist in some way. They tend to identify Hitler with the left as their enemy because they're not pro-Hitler. So here he is interviewing a far-right German party, but the far-right German party is pro-Semitic, pro-Israel, and says that Hitler was an anti-Semitic socialist, and they're actually pro-Semitic libertarians. And he's like, yes, of course. So he seems to think Hitler was a leftist. No one who actually likes Hitler says that Hitler was a leftist. So this is sort of a case against Nazism and for autism. Here's Ben Shapiro's, Judaism's #1 fan, saying that that was a mistake that he did when he did the salute. And the ADL themselves, who Musk has gone after and personally attacked, the ADL said that it was just a mistake, probably, and that we should all calm down. If we're analyzing this claim here, that Elon Musk is literally a Nazi and was doing the Nazi salute, we would probably have to prove that Elon Musk is anti-Semitic. So to make the pro-autism, anti-Nazi case, I don't think it's a stretch to say that Elon Musk has been pretty consistently pro-Semitic over the years. Saying stuff like, I'm aspirationally Jewish and pro-Semitic is not exactly a Hitlerite talking point. Keep in mind here, we are talking about Nazism specifically and not fascism, which we'll get to later in the video. Also, if he was a Nazi, why would he walk it back afterwards? Why would he make terrible, I want to say millennial, but really more boomer puns about Nazism? This is clearly not a guy who's reading Mein Kampf. If he did it and meant it, why wouldn't he just stick to his guns instead of just doing what he normally does and attacking the perceived left-wing legacy media? Finally, Musk was just in a big spat with actual ethno-nationalists, people who would, you could probably describe as white supremacists, people who the term Nazi would probably apply a lot more to, just banning them left and right. So if you think there's any credence whatsoever to this idea that, he is pro-free speech and he thinks the far left and the far right should both be upset by this, and, he's going to ban both the far left and the far right because he's an enlightened centrist, depending on how much weight you want to put on that statement, you would think that Nazism would be a line that he wouldn't want to cross. And during this spat that he had with the ethno-nationalists on Twitter, he said so many things that were very consistent, clearly him not being a Nazi. The point was not to replace DEI, which is one form of racism / sexism, with a different form of racism and sexism, but rather to be meritocratic. Meritocratic, that's the Trump line, that's the new right line, meritocratic society. So not prioritizing someone based off of their race. Everyone's equal. Colorblind. Obviously, the ethno-nationalists are explicitly not colorblind. They are just reverse woke. If Elon Musk was a racist, I don't think that he would be saying the contemptible fools I'm referring to that need to be removed from the Republican Party are hateful, unrepentant racists. So we know that he's autistic, and we know that he does weird shit all the time, and we know that he has been pretty consistent about not being a Nazi. So that's the case for autism. Now let's move on to the case for Nazism. So right off the bat, a leftist might look at his involvement with the Trump campaign and say, Trump is a Nazi, and so he's associating with Nazis, so that makes him a Nazi. I think this is probably a weak argument, but we can start with that. To prove Nazism, we should probably try to prove white supremacy and anti-Semitism. And that's not coming across with the previous tweets. And I mean, even referring to that point, Trump's campaign has been pretty openly pro-Israel. And I don't think Hitler was having a rabbi speak at his inauguration, okay? But there are a few strong cases to be made here. And there's a reason a lot of leftists and liberals are completely convinced that this was a Nazi salute. For example, here is a guy going off on Jews on X, and then Elon Musk replies, "You have said the actual truth." So if you wanted to point to any tweet to call Elon Musk a Nazi or an anti-Semite, that would probably be a pretty cut and dry case. And a lot of very prominent people like AOC are 100% convinced that this was an intentional Nazi salute. So you can look to all kinds of people that you might find reputable, and if they think that this is 100% a Nazi salute, maybe you think it's 100% a Nazi salute. There's a sort of moderate to hard right position here on the perspective to Elon Musk, where he's not a Nazi, but he's doing a little bit of trolling. The idea here is he did do an intentional Nazi salute, but he's not a Nazi, but he did do it intentionally to fuck with people in some way, to make the press scatter, or maybe as like a distraction or diversion from other things that he's doing. Now, going back to the spat he had with the ethno-nationalists on Twitter, you could view this as an attempt to win them back. You could say that he's so desperate for the ethno-nationalists' approval, people who are just ratioing him on Twitter left and right these days, because there are a lot of ethno-nationalists on that platform now, that maybe he just desperately wants to get their approval. He threw them a Sieg Heil, just as a treat. This, I think, is the strongest point for the pro-Nazi argument, all right? I don't know if you guys know this, but when he did the salute, he did it again. He did it twice. He did the salute, and then he turns around and he does it again, which seems a lot like that's an intentional act. Like, let's say you're autistic, you're throwing out a Sieg Heil once in a while, but you do that shit twice. That really seems like something's off here. There's a lot of posts of Democrats doing the same thing, but they're just kind of like gesticulating with their hands and like moving it in a certain direction. They're not pushing it into their heart and going, ah! That shit's crazy. So overall, looking at all the evidence, steel manning both cases, I'd say the case for autism is probably stronger here, but let's keep thinking, okay? Does it matter? Does it matter if he meant it? Arguing about whether or not he is literally a Nazi is kind of splitting hairs. Maybe he's a fascist and we're just calling him a Nazi as a shorthand. Leftist might argue that because of his proximity to Trump and to fascism in general, that it doesn't matter if he meant it or not, because the far right is taking it seriously. The far right likes it. The far right likes that people are panicking. The far right is taking it as an unironic gesture, whether or not he meant it as such. And the left is also taking it as an unironic gesture, whether or not he meant it as such. The only people who seem to go with the autism line are people on the more moderate ends of the left or the right. The only people who seem to be using the autism defense are like Elon Musk fanboys on the moderate to hard right. And these people, like a non-Nazi right-winger, are looking at this and thinking, this is lefty paranoia, these are schizo lefties, they're seeing symbols and everything, and they're just so desperate to decry everything as Nazism. Which brings me to my next point. He may as well have. He really may as well have. It doesn't matter. If the vast majority of people are going to take this as an unironic gesture, even if it was out of autism, he did a Nazi salute. There's no differentiation between intent and the way it is received in a post-truth world. The truth, the core truth of the matter is not something we're going to get to the bottom of. People are going to take from this whatever is beneficial to them to take. And in this case, basically for everyone, it's beneficial to think that Elon Musk did a Nazi salute unironically. So obviously, schizo lefty paranoia, seeing Nazism and everything, sure. If actual Nazis are taking the salute as good for the Nazis, whether or not they think he meant it or not, or even if he did mean it, whether or not they think he's really on the side of the whites, and the vast majority of liberals and leftists are interpreting this as a Nazi salute, he did a Nazi salute. There is no significant difference between his intent and the way that it was received in the public. And of course, I take the side of the far left and the far right simultaneously, so this is a Nazi salute. So that's the evidence I have available to me. But before I go over the conclusion here, let's talk about some perspectives that haven't even been offered by the media yet. The Nazi salute used to be called a Roman salute. So maybe Elon Musk was autistic about the Roman Empire, as many men are. Maybe he's a different kind of authoritarian dictator, a Caesarist, and maybe that salute was just him calling back to Caesar. And speaking of the Roman Empire, maybe this salute was just planned to keep us on our toes and distracted. Maybe he just was giving us some bread and circuses for the proles. Okay, but that's all cerebral nonsense. What's the real conclusion here? One might conclude that all political movements since World War II have been a PTSD reaction to the Nazis. And this obsession with full stop literal Nazism might be blinding us to different ideologies that might be emerging in a sort of right-wing populist moment that we live in. For example, it might surprise you to learn that fascism doesn't have to be white supremacist. It also doesn't have to be anti-Semitic. There are lots of forms of fascism. And it might be useful for you to familiarize yourself with all the different forms of fascism in the coming years. Or else you might get thrown off the scent when, in this interview he does with the far-right leader of Germany, who has advocated for, fascist stuff like remigration, say, I love the Jews, and I actually love Israel. Would Hitler say that? You could look at Elon as the fleeing forces of liberal capitalism to a fascist dictator under Trump. But I don't think that American fascism is going to end up being white supremacist. I think you're going to see a sort of post-racial fascism emerge. And the reason I think that is because look at the fucking ethnic vote, dude! Okay, so now for my serious conclusion. Let's get to the heart of this. Only one answer can be correct. Is he a Nazi or is he autistic? The answer is clear. As a horseshoe theorist, this linear spectrum horseshoes around, and he's an autistic Nazi, basically. Consider the horseshoe completed. He is a Nazi with autism. And in the modern internet context, that's sort of a redundant term. If you're curious about what I'm saying about fascism here, about the idea of a post-racial fascism or a pro-Semitic fascism, I'm making a video about post-racial fascism soon, and also other emerging political tribes that you can be looking forward to that are emerging from the internet over the next few years. So be on the lookout for that.